So if you say there's too much federal employees, well, tell me what you mean by too much. Are they protecting us against banks, or are they helping the big banks? Are they helping the military-industrial complex? Are they doing nothing at all? If you show me the waste, I'm very happy to cut it. But if you say, let's just pick a random number, 10%, 20%, 40% of the federal workforce and just cut it all, well, that doesn't make any sense. That you're telling me that you're doing a hatchet job. You're not going in there and actually doing what the American people voted for.
Cenk Uygur was on NewsNation, squaring off against a seemingly right-wing host, a guy I've never seen before. And they were discussing the slash-and-burn tax that Elon Musk is wielding against our federal government. We're going to dive into these clips Cenk Uygur on NewsNation. I've got some thoughts on this as well. Let's get into it.
Uygur joins us, founder and host of The Young Turks. Good to see you. I'm trying to figure out who thinks defending the federal bureaucracy and saying that money should just keep being spent ad nauseum in defending all of that is a winning strategy.
Yeah, I don't think anyone does, because literally no one is saying that outside of you. So if you want to talk about bureaucracy, the question is, how much regulation should we have? Well, that depends on the job at hand. There's no such thing as too much or too little regulation unless you know what we're regulating. In the case of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, they're regulating the big banks, and the big banks that have literally robbed their own customers. They've gotten $21 billion back for Americans, average middle-class Americans, who the banks were robbing, like Wells Fargo, who was ripping off their own consumers. So this is one of the places where you do not want to get rid of regulation. This is defunding the police on Wall Street. It's a terrible idea.
Okay, so that's Consumer Financial Protection Board. I'm guessing you have no problem with USAID and all the money that's being spent there. And I get it. There is a constituency for spending all this money and for all this regulation and for keeping all these federal employees on the payroll. Other than the far left, progressives, and federal employees, who is that constituency?
No, again, Leland, it depends on what you're talking about. So USAID has some programs that I don't love. And if you put that out there and go, hey, wait a minute, what is this program? Is this a CIA program? What's the actual point of this? That's terrific. Then let's look at it. Let's see if we want to cut it, etc. When you just cut the entire agency, hold on. There's some wonderful programs in there. There's money that goes to churches that help the poor, the needy, the sick, all across the world. There's a program that helps stop HIV in Africa that was actually started by George W. Bush. So this idea of just throwing out an entire agency is infantile. That's not how a rational populace would go about pruning the things that aren't working in the government.
You say a rational populist. I think that requires more examination. What do you mean?
Yeah, so I believe in populism. And yes, right-wing populists and left-wing populists actually do agree on a lot of things. There's also things that we don't agree on. But things we do agree on are, for example, anti-war. And so both sides are anti-war on the populist side, anti-corruption. And there's many others, including negotiating drug prices for Medicare. And at TYT.com, we have a whole plank where the whole country pretty much agrees to these 6 policies.
I want to pause here for a second because while I agree with a lot of what Cenk Uygur is saying, there's a bit I don't see eye to eye on. Now, this host, I think his name is Leland Vittert, he's out there claiming that only the far left and federal employees care about these issues. But let's talk about regulations during Donald Trump's first term. He was all about slashing regulations, promising to cut 2 for every new one introduced, and then it ballooned to 10 to 1. Like Cenk Uygur points out, it really hinges on which regulations you're talking about. The vast majority of Americans, I'd argue, actually support regulations that keep our air and water clean. I mean, who really wants companies dumping toxic waste into our rivers and oceans, right? Those are the kind of regulations we need to keep. On the flip side, yeah, there are some unnecessary regulations, sure, but there's not enough discussion about federal workers. People might rag on them all they want, but in places like where I live, and probably in communities across the country, the federal government is a major employer. I've spoken to lots of locals who aren't federal employees. I'm not one either. And they're like, yeah, get rid of all those lazy federal workers. But if you start cutting those jobs, who's going to support local businesses? If there are major cuts, soon these same folks will wonder why their favorite spots are closing down. It's because there aren't enough people making decent money to dine out or shop locally anymore. Trump said a while back he wants all federal employees to shift to the private sector. But are there even enough jobs out there for them? These are people who've had stable jobs with solid benefits, and now what? They're supposed to work at a gas station making a fraction of their previous salary? None of these decision makers seem to think any of this through.
So if you say to me, hey, look, there's corruption somewhere, great, point out the corruption,
we're talking about
with
stuff
you to get rid of it.
We're talking about stuff that polls at 70, 80%. And frankly, when it comes to government spending and a lack of a government efficiency, that polls at 70 or 80% as well. Here is Mark Cuban, obviously no fan of Donald Trump's, talking about what needs to happen to the size of the federal government.
As a libertarian, I think we can reduce employment in government by at least a third, reduce the overhead and administration by that much or more, so that we can offer more to services for our citizens. I'm happy to push down the size of government, and I'm happy to work on making government more efficient, because then more money can pass through and help the people who need it.
All right, so Cuban 2017. But the fact of the matter is that sometimes you have to break a few dishes, right? That was what Donald Trump, whether you like it or not, was elected to do. Again, Democrats championing all this and saying, oh, no, you can't fire any federal employees. They are sacred cows, as if they're here made of gold on the National Mall. Again, for people who don't like Donald Trump, aren't you just handing him more wins?
Excuse me, sorry. So it depends. Everything depends. So if you say there's too much federal employees, well, tell me what you mean by too much. Are they protecting us against banks, or are they helping the big banks? Are they helping the military-industrial complex? Are they doing nothing at all? If you show me the waste, I'm very happy to cut it. But if you say, let's just pick a random number, 10%, 20%, 40% of the federal workforce and just cut it all, well, that doesn't make any sense. That you're telling me that you're doing a hatchet job. You're not going in there and actually doing what the American people voted for.
Cenk Uygur is spot on again here. No one wants to see their tax dollars flushed down the drain. Sure, we can argue over what counts as waste, but consider this. They're pushing for a 70% cut in medical research funding. It's hard to believe most people would be on board with slashing medical research by such a drastic margin. And as Mark Cuban points out, they're talking about cutting a third of the government workforce. They say they'll reallocate those funds to better serve Americans. But here's the catch. While the GOP claims these cuts are to eliminate waste, they don't really plan to reinvest the savings in public welfare. I'd be thrilled if they shaved off, let's say, 25% or 50% of the defense budget. Why do we need over 900 military bases worldwide? Or the hefty sums we hand over to Middle Eastern countries. Imagine if those funds were redirected to universal health care, tuition-free college, or improving our schools and infrastructure. But no, the Republicans, under Trump's administration and figures like Elon Musk, seem to prefer tax cuts that benefit themselves, not the broader public. This is the real scam. I'm seriously worried we're headed towards becoming like Russia, where once thriving public systems get gutted. Russians used to praise their educational system, and now they lament its downfall. All because leaders like Putin pocket the savings for themselves. That's the future I fear for us. A hollowed-out nation where the rich get richer off the backs of everyone else. Everything seems set to funnel wealth to the likes of Donald Trump and Elon Musk, leaving nothing for the average Joe. What do you think about Cenk Uygur's comments and his appearance on NewsNation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more analysis like this. This is Cole Talk, and I'll catch you in the next video.